I'm doing all right. How about you? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yep.
Oh, perfect. So I'm going to start off with a small video. I'm gonna talk over some of it, but I'm going to let some of it play over top of. See if this definitely starts out. This is kind of a video that overviews what my program covers, and hope it'll work.
There we go.
Aviation Technology. We start by covering the history of aviation, different types of aircraft, and federal aviation regulations.
Okay, so I
We
don't
then
know
get into
if in the
flight
audio
theory
or not. So
and
basically, right now
systems
we're
by
covering kind
introducing
of, this is an
management principles,
older
aircraft
representation of
control
what we
and
cover in
compliance,
terms of
instrumentation,
what's
and
there. So we're
cabinets
covering
with
aviation
software-defined
history. We're
maneuvers,
talking about
landing, and
airplanes. We're
fuel
talking about
consumption. This course is designed to help
different
the
aspects of
students develop the
control,
skills and the attitudes that are
positions
necessary
and
to
job
compete
markets
in
and
a fast-paced and
avenues
fun-filled
inside
aviation.
aviation that we
It's
can
a
use
industry
in
that will
that,
allow you
and
to travel around the
kind
world
of
and
what's
meet
being
new people
represented
and
here.
accept new
And I was going to
responsibilities
knock
working
the
with
audio
people that
out
are
just
very
after he
different.
was done
This
presenting.
course
So
is
this was
designed to
a very good representation of what we did at the beginning. The program started 8 years ago. This is the ninth year for the program, and kind of covers what it comes to airport management, air traffic control, um, aviation management, and what you're seeing in all of this. You actually get hands-on control of an aircraft. And I'm going to jump this forward just a little bit in terms of where we're at and kind of what's going to be presented here. So in this, this kind of covers what we do in the class itself. So some of this is from students themselves. So that this is kind of a nutshell of kind of what we cover, our handbooks that we cover as well. So we use the FAA, get written materials. This is a small video of the Gamma Aviation Design Challenge that, as an instructor, we've taken a place in for the last couple of years. In 2018-2019 school year, sorry, 17-18 school year, we actually took first place, which is what this video is saying, that we took first place. And first place was an all expenses paid trip out to Arlington, Washington, north of Seattle, to build an airplane in 2 weeks. So in this challenge, this is what my students do. This is the engineering portion of it, where we actually utilize technology in the realm of plane maker and X-Plane 10 and 11 to redesign an airplane. So this was kind of the airplane that my students actually redesigned with I mentor them in this case. So my class, it's a lot more of, I'm a mentor and an instructor more than a solution provider. So in this case, we kind of talked about this as a setup. This was last year's airplane. So the last 2 years, we've actually taken second place, where a sim company called Redbird Flight Simulation, they'll come up here in a little bit, will come out with some sims and kind of work with us as like a STEM camp type structure. So this is kind of one of my students in the background is talking about kind of analyzing the wireframe, analyzing the physics that are going on behind this model, analyzing the STEM architecture that you're seeing here, and how many iterations of aircraft design that they're looking at. So this is kind of the engineering portion of the class. So we cover all aspects of aviation, from, like I said before, air traffic control to aerospace engineering, which is this predominant project. And then we get into kind of avionics management in terms of what they did in this video, is kind of going over what they updated so that they could get on the instrumentation panel, what was beneficial for them to actually fly this mission and be successful. So going forward, now this is talking about our test pilot. So we had a test pilot that was very different than the design team. So the test pilot, so now you're talking about teamwork, you're talking about team architecture and communication skills in that regard. So the pilot's now talking about kind of, hey, what worked great for me? What didn't work well? What did we do? How did we minimized fuel flow? We minimized fuel consumption. We maximized flight speed. We maximized payload. So they're looking at all of these scientific principles, scientific aspects, and this is kind of a flight planning now in terms of how do they go from airport A to airport B through the mountain ranges of the Washington area around the big mountain that's out there. Name escapes me at the moment, but definitely were flying right by the side of it, and they made the decisions on how they wanted to fly, and going through this from an engineering perspective. On top of that, we had our lead data analyzer, data analysis type team. So they're looking through all of this data in terms of what they did, if the iterations are getting better, if the iterations of the aircraft are getting worse. So in that regard, they're putting all of this information together, and they have to build a checklist for this airplane. So the biggest key here is the checklist has to be written like any checklist to any airplane out there. So now you're putting it into, hey, here's what we need to do, just like flying a Boeing 747 or a 737 or any Airbus fleet. There's a checklist so that they're actually fulfilling that regard. So you got pilots, you got engineers, you got designers, you got people behind the scenes that are helping manage it in terms of keeping up with what's happening with our flight score here. So that's kind of what this is going through. They actually had to come up with the V speed tables, what we call it. They actually had to take the airplane to its limits. They had to find out where it stalled, how fast it would go, in terms of what they wanted to cruise at, what the best consumptions were. So I wanted to go in real quick. This is us actually in the 2017 year. This is the airplane we did build. So this is what we did get to go out and do. It did visit Buffalo International. I'm going to pause it for 2 seconds right there. It did come and visit Buffalo International. This is what was prior is now Encore's hangar. I'll talk about that in a minute. But this airplane, we didn't see it painted personally, but when it came to Buffalo, they actually flew it into Buffalo just so we could see it. And that's kind of what this is the accumulation of what the class has done and the heritage behind it. So the Redbird flight simulators that came so this is kind of the STEM camp that we did. We talk about aviation weather. I apologize for the sped up. So we're now applying earth science skills. We're looking at aviation weather. We're looking at the atmosphere, what we fly through, how the radar works, how our weather will affect us in terms of flight portions, how highs and lows work, how winds affect it, how forecasting works. We get into, in the senior year, we get more of the hands-on technical skills so that we go into aviation maintenance technicians and they work on understanding the avionics behind it, a little bit of introduction to electronic circuitry. That's actually part of the articulation agreements that we have with some of the colleges in terms of some of the introductions to what they should have going into the future, understanding some basic electrical skills, how to use a voltmeter, how to use a digital multimeter, how to solder, how to understand what a resistor, what a capacitor is. After our discussion here with my student here, the video goes into a little bit more of what we do on the hands-on portion of the class. We actually teach aviation metalworking and safety wear. I have another picture here behind me as a background. So one of the boxes they build is this little riveted box. The biggest issue is they have to realize how they have to install the rivet. They have to actually physically deform the rivet to hold it together. As easy as a box is built, but they have to actually understand it. We worked on some power plants. This is one of our donated jet engines, and this is the engine that runs. In the video, you have a little bit of a section of it that actually covers it. This is one of the old Mercy Flight helicopters. If you've been to a parade, that helicopter, let me go back for a quick second. That helicopter it was painted by some of my students in the collision shop. But this is now in many parades in Mercy Flight's dedication to the people of Western New York in terms of what they do for EMS. So one of the pieces of our program is we have, and I want to put a great shout out to Mercy Flight right now. We do a job internship / workplace job shadow experience where the students actually go out for up to 30 hours or more. And Mercy Flight always takes on a couple students, especially with the dispatch side, the new EMS side, and if they want to experience it, especially I've had nothing but praise from them for the helicopter maintenance kids that go in and experience what it's to be like to be a maintenance technician on now the new Bell 429. So that's one of the reasons they asked us to take care of that. In this case, this is my students actually running the. You don't get to hear the sound behind it, but all safety precautions are taken into account. And this is they all get to see how one starts and how it actually runs and what we do with it and how the temperatures are in it. So we're looking at it from a combustion standpoint, like it takes fuel in and what do we get out of it, or what are we dealing with. So this is our older flight sim setup. So this right now is flight simulator training. This was before pre-COVID, where students actually worked in a crew platform. So right now this pair, time is sped up, but this pair is actually working on a flight from this airport A to airport B, and they had a whole flight plan put together, and they're working as a crew. So they're captain and first officer, but they're flying a basic airplane, idea as it would be in real architecture out in real life. So they're doing an airport pattern here, so they're going to go around the pattern. But this was kind of the instruction. So they're actually in simulated world doing what it would be like in the industry. So they're going around, they're actually flying, they're getting these experiences. They're putting math and physics in play in terms of what we're covering and actually putting it in application. And that's been the biggest key to all the students, is that the students actually see the application of some of the topics they've learned, aviation history, math, science, especially the engineering portion. All of those aspects come into play with even earth science and understanding the atmosphere and how the atmosphere around us is actually more of a fluid than it is just air, and how that affects us. So that's kind of what this is showing us here. So this is a demonstrated flight. And then the biggest key of what my students get to do, this is simulation. But after this, we have some also written work that we cover. But after I go over kind of what we're dealing with, I have them journal what they've covered. So this is leading into the biggest key of my class, is the actual physical student flight experience. This is a video of a student flight where I send a camera with them if they're allowed, and they can have the video when they're done, and they get to experience the full-on control of an aircraft with a Encore flight instructor. Encore took over Prior Aviation, merged with Prior Aviation this past year. So this is an example of what one of my students would do, and this is sped up. This is definitely a faster video for time allotment, but this is an example of what my students actually get to do during class time. So we'll actually go out and actually fly a physical airplane for about an hour, a couple times a year over your heads, and with the flight instructors. If you have ever any questions with regard to that, I'm always more than apropos to talk to people about it. So this is kind of a video in a nutshell of kind of what we do, the instrumentation that we cover, the fact that we go into drone architecture, the fact that drones are now a big portion of what we cover in terms of it. And then in what we're covering now is some of the backgrounds that I'm going to have behind me in a minute are going to show some of what our new technology is. So the background behind me now, I'm going to move to the side just a little bit. What you see here is our newest flight simulator. It's got the on-glass display, so it's the new technology that's behind us. And what that is, this is the Redbird TD2. So this is, Redbird is now a big proponent to our class, and they're good friends of mine now. And the company, I love what they do. And their simulator, the students love flying it because of the new technology. That's what it's got. That's what the industry is bringing into play. And in that regard, some of the other aspects of class that I wanted to make sure that I brought back out are, oh, it's not letting me do other there. So the other piece of earth science is that the background's going to change here in just a second, but the biggest key now is understanding the architecture of mapping and around us. So this map behind me here is an actual map, the sectional map of Western New York and Long Island. So if you take a look at it, it's actually backwards. But this is kind of the map that we actually get to read and understand and analyze inside class. And this is what they use to provide the flight plans for those flights that are on the sim. So they're getting that real life understanding and basis behind what they're doing. And the last picture I'm going to pop in here, just so you guys get an idea of what's going on, is the metalworking picture and some of the toolage that we use in terms of aviation metalworking, and how that metal box that was talked about in the video, this is some of the stuff that they're going to utilize. And the example I use is that there's a toolbox back here, this the blue covered aluminum. That's actually a rivetable toolbox that is usable in industry, or then they're going to come up with a fabrication idea. So you actually utilize metal structure. The goal of the program is to someday build an airplane in the classroom. That would be a dream of mine. But that's kind of what we cover in class, and I'm going to open it up to any questions that we've got or anything else that we need to cover.
I have some questions for you, Mr. Leach.
Yeah,
So
I figured.
you mentioned articulation agreements. What colleges and schools do you have articulations with your program?
So to go into articulation agreements just a little bit, I'm going to expand that question and go into the college architecture and where they go. So with all of the aspects of aviation that we cover, I introduce all of these avenues for these students to go. So they can kind of pick a direction. So that kind of leads me into kind of how the articulation agreements are built. So there are schools, I have a huge college list of aviation schools, further education, trade schools that provide aviation areas and careers, from maintenance technicians to pilots to unmanned operators to all of these avenues. So right now I've got an articulation agreement with Mohawk Valley Community College in Rome, New York. And in that school, they do a 1-year aviation maintenance technician program. So in 1 calendar year, they're out, your son or daughter are out making $20 to $25 an hour starting, and there's still need for those jobs for maintenance technicians. And in 1 year they're done. So there's an introduction to that. I have another agreement with Edinburgh University down in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm not sure where that's going to go, but that one's a professional pilot program that was an agreement with Prior, and I believe that agreement's going to follow through with Encore Aviation, which merged with Prior in the last month or two. And I'm also in talks with, there's several schools in Florida. Polk Aviation School, everybody understands that Embry-Riddle's out there. Purdue's got a good school. Kent State's got a good school. So I'm continuing developments on articulation agreements. But in the case of what we've got right now, we got Mohawk Valley Community College for a maintenance technician and Edinburgh for a professional pilot. But with Encore's merger, there's going to be major pushes to the youth and aviation program to help them even locally stay here and fly with Encore Aviation to be able to get that rating and get those jobs started or their career choices started.
Awesome. And for anyone that doesn't know, an articulation agreement means that if you're in aviation, you can earn college credit while you're in high school, while you're in Mr. Leach's class to any of those programs, right? So you can be kind of double dipping in a way.
Very true.
Cool. So the other thing that you mentioned were so many different career tracks that you can do with aviation. So for people that want to be like flight attendants and travel the world for the rest of their life, this is also applicable to them, right?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, it gets them the basic knowledge of what's going on in the aircraft and what they're dealing with in the structure. Even down to the TSA. I've had students. I got your questions up here. I've got students that have done internships with TSA at the TSA branch at the Buffalo International Airport, to baggage handling, to flight line service, to cargo handling, to fueling of airliners. One of my students that had one of those, they actually got to fuel the Buffalo Bills charter flight, and the Bills, the airplane was still there, but the Bills weren't there yet, and he had to put, forgot exactly how many thousands of gallons of fuel on that airplane. Overseen by the guy that's there. But in terms of the market for this, the market is going to open up. And I know everything's concerned about COVID right now, and that the airline industry is very hurting. Well, that's the airline industry. The corporate side of it is heating up because people are buying personal jets. Maintenance technicians are in need because they need to bring these airplanes back into service. Maintenance technicians need to definitely look them over before they fly again. Flight attendants are always in need. Air traffic controllers. So there's a cyclic pattern to aviation. There always is. But I've had anywhere from students going from professional pilots. I've got students that are right now a success story. One of the Encore instructors right here at Buffalo International was one of my first year students when the program just started. So
wow.
He actually instructs the students now, the current students, and they all love flying with him. And he's an instructor now, and he was one of my first students ever in the program. So he's working to become a professional pilot up to his 1,500 hour point to get in an airliner. I have students at Embry-Riddle that have gone through that program, Kent State, UND, the University of North Dakota, the Western Michigan University, and they're all doing professional pilots. But I've also had success stories dealing with maintenance technicians. So some of my students that have gone on to becoming maintenance technicians, they're working on 747s every day or corporate jets every day. Imagine working on a $20 million personal vehicle. Well, that's what one of the girls that has graduated has done. Military. I've had students go in every branch of the military: Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard and Coast Guard aviation in terms of that, and the Air Force, definitely. And I have students this year looking into that as well. So a lot of what we deal with can get a step in the right direction regarding a lot of those aspects of the industry and where they're headed.
That's fantastic. I actually never, I mean, it's silly, but I never really thought about the military, and this is such a great segue into doing that on a professional level. I never put that together.
Oh yeah, and one of my other success stories, he graduated 2 years ago, but he's ready to become. He's probably going to be heading to the FAA Air Traffic Controller Academy after his college level instruction to become a full-fledged air traffic controller. Got a couple of those that have gone that way. I've got students that have gone into meteorology. I've also got students that have done this as a hobby after the fact. One's a personal trainer and got his license after the fact. So there's all aspects of aviation that most people look into in terms of what they do and what they can do. But aviation is such a huge industry. Aviation such a like I said, there's a cyclic pattern. But if anybody joins the class now and they're looking toward it, Boeing still says that they need 200 and some thousand plus people to join aviation in the next 10, 20 years, and we don't have the pipeline filled. So if somebody joined aviation at that point, and we get back on the positive side of COVID, there's jobs out there waiting. Everybody heard about the pilot shortage. Well, it's going to come back at some point. Retirees are still retiring, and we still have pilots fulfilling those positions. But at some point, the pipeline going in is not equaling the pipeline coming out and demand.
So you mentioned hours too. So to become I'm going to use the term commercial pilot. Is that correct?
Commercial pilot is a pilot for hire. So that would be somebody who could fly a jump plane for parachutists, or a freighter that they're flying freight or something like that. So, or you've seen at the Bills games or something like that, the airplane towing a banner. That's a commercial rated pilot. They are hired to do a job. What you're talking about, right? Well, there can be. You could be hired to fly a small corporate jet or something like that as a commercial pilot. But traditionally, the other term that most people would need to understand is airline transport pilot, ATP. That's the 1,500-hour rule after the Colgan incident and the law after that. So 1,500 hour to get to the airline. So when you're talking commercial pilot, most people think an airline pilot. Those are two slightly different aspects in the industry. But 1,500 hours, and I was talking to a kid who's flying for Google Earth imagery, and they're flying planes back and forth, and he makes 700 hours a year. So you can definitely find ways to get paid and make that 1,500 hours rather quickly.
Wow. I didn't really realize any of that. And Google Earth, that's like duh, they're in the air. They need pilots.
Or all the satellite imagery. Actually, a lot of the time it doesn't come from satellites.
Interesting. See, I'm learning more in these talks than I think I would have ever learned if I just, flipped through the book or went on our website. So this is pretty cool. But I do have like one big kind of question for you. So when a student comes into your class, what is one trait of theirs that they could rely on to carry them really far in your program?
Okay, so to answer that question, I'm going to change my background back to the flight sim because I think it looks cool and it's better. One of the traits that I really think is in the theme of the year this year even is personal responsibility and dedication. We're taking topics that they've learned and we're going to apply them in the real world. So the biggest key to my class is that dedication and drive to succeed, to push forward and to strive for their best. And basically hard work. They have to be able to work hard and understand that it's not just flying an airplane every day. There's a lot more behind it. or it's not just putting a rivet into a hole that you drilled. There's a lot more thought behind it. There's a lot more understanding of the material and what you're dealing with and what's included in that. So understanding and the follow through and the dedication to hard work is a big key of what I would look for in a student coming to the class.
Awesome. So like having that drive and knowing that even if you don't want to be a pilot, you might still want to work with planes. But that's your goal, is to work with aircrafts and things like that.
Right, and one of the keys to my class is we also have the FAA that oversees a lot of the licensing of all of these industry components. And I'll tell you right now, an FAA trained mechanic, if you're an aviation maintenance technician, you don't have to work on airplanes. They know that you passed a federal exam. You could go work on wind turbines. You can work with Caterpillar on diesel construction equipment. So not just does it start there, but because they know how you're trained and what you've been able to pass and what you've succeeded in, that opens up doors to the industry in many different aspects that most people didn't even begin to think of.
Again,
like
I would have had no
SpaceX.
idea.
Yeah, SpaceX, the new reusable capsule that's going up to the space station. Aviation maintenance technicians sign that thing off before it launches. So there's even space that's involved. And because it flies, if it goes above the ground, drone technology, there's a lot behind that too. So there's aviation in a lot more industries. One of the biggest examples I love to give is the flowers that you get. Somewhere, somebody dealing with aviation had to touch those at least 10 times. And
Really?
it's from being flown in from a different country to the maintenance technician who took care of that aircraft, to the cargo handlers who took care of it, to the airline fuelers that fueled it. You got so many different people in that, and the controllers that controlled that airplane in overnight. So shipping, like everybody orders stuff on Prime nowadays, or that a lot of cargo flies at night. And so there's aviation in a lot of key aspects of what we do in everyday life nowadays.
I never thought about that, but that's a perfect example. Awesome. Well, I think that's our 30 minutes, Mr. Leach. Thank you so much for sharing everything. And yeah, this has been so informative. I learned a lot.
And if anybody has any questions, feel free to look up my contact information on the E1B aviation page under CTE, and go to the aviation page and send me a quick message, and I'll get back to you and kind of provide you any more information that you guys require and go through any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Mr. Leach. I appreciate it.
More than welcome. Have a good one.
All right, you too.